It's hard to believe, but this Thursday, June 18th, my family and I will have been living in this house on this land in this county for 2 years. And it was a year in the making, us even getting up here. Um, our decision to move up here ultimately was so that my uh, family, our girls, can have a permanent location to call home. This was our 11th move as a married couple, mine and Becca's. Of course, the girls were in the mix with some of those, and it was starting to uh, wear on the family. And we made the decision, we made plans, we had a place to move to. Uh, all the people that we talked to were supportive, but on June 18th, when we finally moved up here, um, we realized that it was going to be a little more difficult than we thought it was going to, than we planned, because the second day we were here, we realized that the, the water line was busted. So we had to find that and fix that. And I assure you, I am no plumber. We'll see how long it's going to stay fixed. But also, a couple weeks later, the AC went out. And then later that year, in the fall, when we needed the furnace, it went out. There were a lot of troubles in the moving up here process. It was far more difficult than we had planned. Um, but our reason for moving up here is worth growing through the trouble we experienced. Because I can happily say that 2 years later, um, our AC is working, our furnace is working, um, but also financially, we're in a much better place than we've ever been. Occupationally, we've been in a better place than we've ever been. Um, and just relationally overall, as a family, as a married couple, Becca and I, we are doing better than we have in the past. And we give a lot of the credit, not only being up here, but growing through the trouble, growing, growing through the trouble that we experienced to be here because it was worth it. And you know this. I mean, the best experiences are earned. The best experiences in life, you have to work for it. I heard often growing up that if it's not easy, it's not meant to be. If it's not easy, it's not meant to be. And I got to tell you that was kind of the mantra I had for many years. But now I've come to see the flaw in that logic, because if easy is the determining factor for something to have worth, then very few things would happen. Um, Talk to any woman who's delivered a baby. That is not easy. So if easy is the determining factor, then no babies would be born. No buildings would be built. No gardens would be planted. Um, and perhaps most importantly, no marriages would last. A lot of friendships wouldn't last. If if easy is the main ingredient, if easy is the determining factor for something to happen, then so few things would happen. And again, perhaps most importantly, the relationships that we're in would not happen, because relationships, if we're being honest, are probably the most difficult thing we encounter. Um, because it seems the stronger the relationship, the more effort it requires. And I think that's why Paul wrote this thought in the letter to the Galatians. He said that we need to carry one another's burdens, and in doing so, we fulfill the law of Christ. We need to carry one another's burdens, and in doing so, we fulfill the law of Christ. What's the law of Christ? It's what we talked about last week. It's Jesus said that we need to love one another as he loves us. Love one another as he loves us. And Paul says that we need to carry one another's burdens so that we fulfill that law. Carrying one another's burdens is not simply waving and smiling at people. It's getting to know each other in depth. It's getting to know each other's families, about their families maybe, if you can't necessarily know their families, but about their families, about their upbringing, about their struggles, about their joys. This is a wonderful metaphor that Paul uses to carry one another's burden, because it's not just hearing about their struggle, it's not just hearing about their burden, but if you're going to carry someone's burden, you're going to do the work so they don't have to. Paul is telling us that we shouldn't just know one another, that fulfilling the law of Christ, that Christ tells us to love one another as he loves us. In order to do that, it's not just simply knowing about them. It's not just simply being in close proximity to them and maybe knowing their name, but man, he takes it to a totally different level and gives us the analogy that we need to know them on a level that we are working for them so that they don't have to. If you carry my burden, that means I'm not carrying it. If I carry your burden, that means you're not carrying it. This is the standard that Paul gives us to fulfill the law of Christ. And let's be honest, that is not easy, but it is absolutely worth it for us, the one who's carrying the burden, and for them, those who have their burdens carried. The best experiences are earned. And the more beneficial an experience is for others, the better it is for us. And you know this. I mean, if you've ever volunteered, if you've ever served others in various ways, you know that those experiences tend to be a little more memorable than the ones that only involve you. I was talking to a friend this week, and he is a retired fellow who has a distinguished career, and he's very, very intelligent, very, very competent, and he was working at a personal care home where he was essentially spending time with the guys, driving them to where they needed to be. If I can say it this way, much lower. The job responsibility was beneath him. Let's be honest. But he made the comment that he would always check his ego at the door, and he was intentional about spending time with special needs men who needed the assistance of others, needed others to carry their burden. And he told me about a specific instance whenever he first started working there soon after. And there was one gentleman who was in a wheelchair, and one of the tasks that needed to be done, one of this man's burdens, was that he needed lotion rubbed on his feet on a regular basis. And the guy that I was talking to made the comment when he first saw it. He was like, "No, I'm sorry. No, I'm not going to do that. Those feet are not attractive, and that is just something. No, I draw the line." But as he saw other individuals taking off this man's shoes, taking off this man's socks, and rubbing lotion on those unattractive feet, he realized that that was a burden he needed to carry. And he made the comment that over time, he saw it as an honor to rub lotion on a man's feet. This man was 72 years old, 70-something years old, in a wheelchair, who had less than desirable feet. And the guy said it was an honor to rub lotion on somebody's feet. That was not easy. That was an experience that was earned. But as I was talking with this guy this week, it was clear that that was a very meaningful experience for him. It was relational. He was carrying somebody's burden, and he was absolutely fulfilling the law of Christ. See, this mindset that Paul's talking about whenever he says to carry one another's burdens, that's the mindset Jesus had. See, if you read the Gospels, you'll learn pretty quickly that it was not easy spending those 3 years in ministry for Jesus. The encounters he had, the situations he encountered, the conversations, they were not easy. Dealing with his disciples for those 3 years was not easy. The pathetic excuse for a trial that he encountered, being tortured, being crucified, that was not easy. That was not easy. But it was the best thing that possibly could have happened for all of us. Because the experience that Jesus, the situation that Jesus experienced benefited everybody. It was relational. It benefited everybody. See, God carried our burdens by becoming one of us and taking our sin. God exemplified this idea of carrying one another's burdens, showing love for one another by doing that to the fullest, by becoming human and taking on our trials, knowing exactly what it's like to be a person and taking our sin. So, as followers of Jesus, what excuse do we have to do otherwise? What leg do we have to stand on if we try to justify not getting to know people who are not like us? How can we justify only being with Christians? Or, depending who you are, only being around white people or people who are in the same political party as you? Or how can we justify that when we benefit from the very God who went through the trouble, the burden, to become one of us so that he would know us, we would benefit from that relationship. See, getting to know people in other demographics is difficult. Absolutely. But the best experiences are earned. It's what we're called to do. It's the community that we are expected to create, to strengthen, and to live in. God calls us to take on those experiences, to take on those troubles for the sake of others. Because the best experiences happen with and for others. For the sake of a relationship, for the sake of a community. God expects us to carry one another's burdens. You and I have benefited from God carrying our burdens. Why wouldn't we carry others? Why would we not carry another person's burden? The reason we would do it, it's worth the trouble. The reason for being in a situation, in a relationship, in a community, that we can help one another, that we can grow relationally, that we can love one another. The reason we would do that is worth growing through that trouble. God has called us to do it. We're expected to do it, and it benefits others. That's the community that we should be in. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you have set us an example for how to be in community with one another. We thank you that you have done so much for us. And Lord, help us to take that mentality forth and do for others, so that your body, the body of believers, so that the community of believers would be strong and ever expanding. We thank you for what you've done for us. Help us to do for others. In Christ's name, amen.